at 10:15, we open up page 2, and we start a conversation with David Stokes with the Show Me Institute. Good morning, David. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great today, Manny. Good morning to you and your listeners.
This morning, we're going to talk about a couple different things. Let's start first of all with the city of Laurie. They had a special election on Tuesday, and this was to break a tie that had happened in the April election. And the issue at hand was the use tax, and there was 92 for, 92 against the last time it was in front of voters in Laurie. But a bit of a different story this time around with the special election on Tuesday.
Right. This time it lost. It was, again, very close, just like it was back in 2012 when they put the use tax on the ballot. And for your listeners who may not recall, a use tax is simply the application of the local sales tax on goods purchased out of state, such primarily over the Internet. So it's pretty clear to me that they've had 3 votes on it in the past little over a year. They're 0-2-1 in hockey statistics. They'd have 1 point. But that's not good enough, so I think it's time for the city of Laurie to let this rest. Obviously, the voters of Laurie do not want a local use tax and would prefer some level of cuts to local government. So it's my hope that the city fathers and city mothers let this lie for 3 or 4 years and just allow the voters to have had their say.
It is a little unusual in the way that elections go. It was on the ballot last August in Laurie. It went down to a pretty heavy defeat. They revisited it again in April. And, I had to have the special election because of the tie. But was it maybe a situation of the use tax, or was it a situation of the elections being so close together that had an impact on the result?
I don't know. It's certainly an unusual situation to have so many elections so close, and I don't want to blame Laurie too much. Obviously, they had a third election because of a tie in the second one. Look, I think use taxes have been in the news a lot in the past year, so I think the typical voter knew what they were talking about when they went to the polls. I don't think it was just a generic anti-tax vote. I think you probably had some very informed voters. The ones who did show up were probably very informed and knew the pluses and minuses. They knew there'd be about a $4,000 hit to city coffers if the newspaper reports are accurate, or they could pay a little higher taxes on out-of-state goods when they purchased. And the city voters of Laurie have now said twice in the last year and a half that they don't want a use tax. And while the tie was amusing and always a great political science example of the value of your vote, and one vote can matter, look, the voters have spoken, and I hope that it's laid to rest for a few more years.
The other interesting aspect of this election on Tuesday is the fact that the turnout was pretty low, and we've heard from Laurie Mayor Herb Keck, and he was quite disappointed with the turnout of about 12%, and much different than the April, even though the April election didn't have a high percentage necessarily. But again, not a lot of voters hit the polls on Tuesday. No,
when you have these truly strange election dates, like an early June special election, I mean, this is just what you're going to get. And I don't blame the city council in this case. Again, we're dealing with the strange circumstance of a tie back in the normal election time. But that was sort of inevitable and should have been expected. I believe it probably was. That's not to say that the 88% of the voters or 85% who didn't vote. I mean, I think they should have. It's the value of your vote increases as turnout decreases. So I've never understood the once every 4-year voter who shows up on presidential election day in November every 4 years and casts their vote along with approximately 150 million other people and never shows up again. If you're going to show up just once in a while to vote, and I think everybody should vote regularly, you should show up for these special elections where your vote really means something.
It does seem like, though, David, officials in Laurie are probably going to walk away from this issue for a while. How long that issue is going to be, or how long a time off, I guess if you want to call it that, is going to be, we're not sure. But it's very clear that voters in Laurie were not very excited about the idea of a use tax, even though it does mean the city would would lose money. But do you think the idea in general of a use tax, is that going to come up again? Let's take it to the state legislature. Is that going to be an issue again for the legislature come January?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's going to be an issue here in the veto session in September, as Governor Nixon vetoed the bill to go back to the way it was for car purchasing, which instituted a use tax on the purchase of cars and boats purchased out of state. And although the counties in the Ozark area have passed use taxes, so they will be collected there, this is a big issue statewide. And if it's not dealt with in the veto session, absolutely. We're going to be talking about it again on this show and many other places come January.
Let's change gears here a little bit, David, and switch away from the special election, and let's talk about Osage Beach a little bit. We've got some more economic news, some more economic things happening in Osage Beach. And when we talk about development, normally in places like Osage Beach and Camdenton, you usually don't always talk about things like CIDs and NIDs. But those are happening in Osage Beach. Can we start, first of all, with a bit of a refresher on what a CID and an NID are?
Well, a CID is a community improvement district, and a NID is a neighborhood improvement district. They're fairly similar, so I think we can describe them both in one swoop, although they have some technical differences. They are special taxing districts which allow a neighborhood or a city or community to impose a special tax, either a property tax or a sales tax, for public goods within that community, be it neighborhood beautification or better cleaning or new plantings. Or there's really a wide variety of choices for both of them. So there are opportunities to impose special taxes that will have some level of public benefit. That's the unbiased definition I will give for them.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you have a lot of these economic development I guess documents that are used, and the letters are very similar to each other, CID, NID. The bottom line is cities throughout the state and really throughout the country, they use these to develop certain areas, and that's what we're seeing in Osage Beach.
And this is something that we've been discussing for the length of time that I've been participating in Show Me at the Lake, and I've talked about it in talks I've given at the Ozarks and throughout the state. These types of special taxing districts, the problem with them is not that any individual one is bad in and of itself. The problem is that they just grow geometrically. And we've been saying this now for 6 or 7 months. When you combine these with TIF, in TDDs, or Transportation Development Districts, and EEZs, which Camden County, the Enhanced Enterprise Zone, that they're now considering. I mean, the process builds upon itself, and once you start imposing one of them, it makes it easier, and the economic development officials get involved, and you start imposing lots of them, and then a few years later you turn around, and everywhere you shop in your community has some sort of multiple levels of special taxes imposed, be it through a TDD or a CID, or if it's not a special tax through like a TIF, it's imposed by redirecting the taxes that you do spend, and that's what happens in a TIF. So they build upon themselves, and in the end, they don't really work. There's no evidence that these programs, on the whole, develop an economy.
We're talking with David Stokes from the Show Me Institute on Show Me at the Lake here at News Talk 1150 and 97.5 KRMS. Are there, I guess, does this come from someplace, all of these different economic development tools? Does it start at the state level with different tools, options, if you will? Or is that where the notions of these start and they trickle down to the cities, or is it the cities themselves that go after trying to find more economic development tools?
Well, the state authorizes all of them. So yes, they all begin at the state, but the state doesn't impose them on anyone. They all are left up to options. And sometimes it's the cities or the counties that do it. Sometimes, as possible with CIDs, property owners themselves can just impose them on their own, and you have to go out and you need a a majority of the signatures of the property owners in an area to impose a community improvement district. And that sounds great, except that sometimes that property owner can just be one person who owns a retail outlet and then chooses to impose a new tax on that retail store to help offset public services that 20 years ago the business owner would have been forced to pay for. So that's how these things are used and often abused. And on the as they go, TIF I think is the worst, and too many of them, particularly TDDs, can be imposed without any type of public input at all. At least with SIDs and NIDs, you're going to have some level of elected officials giving approval. They might not impose it, but they have to be involved in the debate, which is a good thing.
Are there other ways then communities without SIDs and NIDs and TIFs and EEZs, are there other ways communities can successfully develop themselves economically?
Oh, absolutely, Manny. I mean, it's amazing how America got by for 240 years without these explosion of special taxing districts. I mean, the Lake of the Ozarks developed into the thriving, great area that it is without the use of all these TIFs and TDDs and SIDs. I mean, they're not necessary. They once they become imposed, once you start doing it, you generally have economic development officials at the state and local level who have an active interest in. That's what they're paid to do. They are paid to implement programs. Whether these programs actually work is of no importance to them. And that's what you have in your EEZ right now in Camden County. And the EEZ is closely related to all these other types of programs. They're just put in because elected officials want to be seen as doing something. And that's not a Democrat or Republican statement, and it's not a partisan statement. Elected officials want to be out there doing something for their community. And when you have economic development officials telling them how great something's going to be and how there's really no real cost and how it's borne by tourists or whatever, it's hard to say no. But the fact is that there's no academic evidence and there's no historic evidence that these programs really work. In the end, keeping a low, fair tax rate for everybody and treating all businesses the same is the better long-term way to grow your economy.
Is there a way then, once you start down the road with these different economic vehicles, for lack of a better term, is there a way then, if you do start, that you can get away from them, or is it a situation where once you start, you can't stop?
Well, I think in general it's the latter. The way around that is to have a lot of discipline at your elected officials level to really say, well, we'll do it in this case where we think it's necessary, but we're going to say no to these other cases. And that's I don't see that generally in Missouri. It's more common to see places like Kansas City and St. Louis do these special taxing districts over and over and over again. And the rest of Missouri, rural Missouri, and the Ozarks seems to be following. You had an example in Columbia where they passed an enhanced enterprise zone, and the opposition stayed around even after it was passed, and you had the city council rescind it. So there's an example of where somebody said no, let's get rid of this. It's not working, or it's not worth the hassle. So it can happen, sure, but generally speaking, once they're passed, they're in for a long time, and they're here to stay.
David Stokes with the Show Me Institute. Please give us your contact information, also the website there, if folks would like to find out more about the work that the Show Me Institute has done with things like CIDs, NIDs, TIFs, EEZs, and the ABCs of everything else in between.
Right. It's like the New Deal all over again. It really is just the alphabet soup of these types of programs that are so hard for the public to stay informed about because they're so complicated. You can find a lot of writing on all these programs at showmeinstitute.org, and your listeners can follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes.
David Stokes with the Show Me Institute. Thank you again so much, sir, for the time. We will chat again next Thursday morning for Show Me at the Lake here on the Morning Magazine on KRMS.